Alexander Grant stepped into the towering glass atrium of Crown Global's headquarters, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off polished marble floors. Dust clung to his boots from the early morning streets of Manhattan. His navy hoodie, slightly wrinkled from the red-eye flight, hung loose over faded jeans. A battered leather backpack sat slung over one shoulder above him. Chandeliers glimmered like frozen constellations, but the atmosphere shifted the moment he approached the reception desk. Conversations lowered. A few executives in tailored suits glanced over briefly, their expressions tightening in the polite, practiced way that said you don't belong here. From behind the reception counter, Victoria Kane appeared, her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she stepped out from a side hallway. Tall, poised, and immaculately dressed in charcoal gray, she wore authority like an accessory. One glance at Alexander and her lips curved into a professional smile with just enough frost to make her meaning clear. "Sir," she said smoothly, "this is a private building. We don't allow walk-ins." Alexander's eyes didn't flinch. "I have an appointment scheduled under AG Holdings." Victoria didn't so much as glance at the computer. Instead, she tilted her head, as though inspecting a misplaced object in a luxury boutique. "I think you have the wrong address," she replied, her tone sharpened to surgical precision. Around them, a subtle performance began. To men in bespoke suits exchanged knowing smirks near the elevator bank. A woman in a designer coat whispered something to her colleague, her eyes never leaving Alexander. It wasn't hostility, it was something colder. Dismissal wrapped in curiosity. Alexander simply stood still. This was why he had come. Not to see the smiling masks executives put on for investors, but to see the reflexive instincts when they thought no one important was watching. Victoria folded her arms neatly. "We have certain standards here," she said slowly, "and you might be more comfortable somewhere less particular." The words landed like a velvet-trapped insult. A few chuckles rippled quietly through the lobby. Someone murmured, probably wandered in off the street. Alexander reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek, matte black card. Heavy, unmistakable, Centurion, no limit, by invitation only. He placed it on the counter. Victoria's eyes flickered over it once, then her smile deepened. Anyone can get a fake these days. A sharp intake of breath passed through the lobby. Even the young receptionist, seated beside her, flinched. Alexander didn't move. "I'll ask you one more time to check your system," he said evenly. Instead, Victoria reached under the counter and pressed a button. Two uniformed security officers emerged from the corridor. She didn't look at Alexander again, only pointed. The receptionist, a young man named Ethan Rowe, froze, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. He looked from Victoria to Alexander, sensing something wasn't right. But authority stood right in front of him, waiting for compliance. The security team closed in. One gestured toward the revolving doors, the other rested a hand lightly on Alexander's shoulder. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. As they guided him toward the exit, the whispers trailed behind him. "Imposter, security risk, wrong building." Outside, the cold air bit at his face. He took out his phone and called his assistant. "Schedule a board call, 20 minutes, send the press release. And make sure someone captures every face in that lobby." The humiliation wasn't the point, the reaction was, and soon, every person who had just watched him leave would learn exactly who they had escorted out. 20 minutes later, Alexander sat in the back of a black SUV idling at the curb across from Crown Global's headquarters. The winter wind swirled past the windows, but he didn't notice. His gaze was fixed on the building, the empire he had just purchased. To the employees inside, Crown Global was a prestigious fortress of glass and steel. To Alexander, it was a $5.4 billion acquisition finalized only 3 days earlier, sealed through a chain of holding companies to avoid early publicity. The ink was barely dry when he booked his first visit, not as the owner, but as a stranger. He had done this before. It was the only way to see the truth beneath the polished investor reports and PR-driven culture videos. A CEO could spend millions on onboarding campaigns and still miss the rot that hid in plain sight. You had to walk through the front door unseen. You had to let the system show its true face. As the SUV's heater hummed softly, his mind drifted backward 20 years to a different lobby in a different world. He had been 21, freshly dropped out of college, working nights as a janitor in a mid-tier hotel chain. The smell of bleach and carpet cleaner clung to his skin long after shifts ended. His parents had immigrated from a rural town in northern England with nothing but debts and stubbornness. Every dollar mattered, every setback hurt. He learned quickly that in hospitality, finance, and retail, really, in any service industry, perception often outweighed competence. Guests were judged by their shoes, employees by their posture. He watched ambitious young staff leave after being passed over for promotions in favor of more presentable candidates. He saw the talented ignored while the photogenic were celebrated. He swore then that if he ever built a company, talent and integrity would outweigh appearances. But ideals were easy to hold when you were poor and powerless. They were harder to uphold when billions were at stake. His rise had been brutal. Alexander's first venture, a small chain of budget hotels, nearly collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. He slept in his office for months, negotiated with creditors until his voice went hoarse, and sold his car to make payroll. When the business finally stabilized, he pivoted to acquisitions, buying struggling assets and turning them into market leaders. By 42, he was worth over $3 billion. He owned properties, logistics companies, and now one of the most prestigious corporate real estate portfolios in the world. But the higher he climbed, the more he saw the same patterns repeating, the same gatekeeping, discrimination, and arrogance that had driven him to mop floors decades earlier. This visit wasn't about catching a single rude executive. It was about finding out if the culture he had just bought was salvageable or if it needed to be torn out by the roots. He checked his watch. 15 minutes until the emergency board call. His assistant, Rachel Myers, a sharp-minded former investigative journalist, had been with him for 8 years. She knew his methods and had already started compiling the morning security footage. "We've got clear shots of everyone," she said over the phone. Front desk, security, spectators, even a few employees smirking. Alexander exhaled slowly. "Good, we'll need that." Rachel hesitated. "You know the press will eat this alive. It's going to be a public bloodbath." "That's the point," Alexander replied, his tone even. "If the people at the top think no one's watching, they'll never change. Sometimes, the only way to fix a culture is to make the world watch it break." He ended the call and looked up at the building again. Somewhere inside, Victoria Kane was probably holding court, her confidence unshaken, maybe even bragging about the trespasser she'd had removed. That arrogance was about to meet reality, and when it did, it wouldn't just be her job on the line. The revolving doors at Crown Global's headquarters turned slowly, and Alexander Grant stepped back into the lobby. Same hoodie, same worn backpack, same unhurried pace, but the energy in the room had shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. A man in a pinstripe suit lowered his coffee cup without sipping. Someone at the reception desk fumbled a pen to the floor. Recognition was dawning in fragments, first in the receptionist, Ethan Rowe, then in the guests, then in the staff who had smirked earlier. Ethan's throat went dry. His monitor was still open to the reservation system, the one he had checked. After Alexander left, the entry glared back at him. AG Holdings, executive tier, confirmed corporate owner access. He didn't need to type a thing. Alexander stopped at the counter, looking directly at him. "I believe you still have my appointment on file," he said, calm but unmistakable. "Yes, sir," Ethan managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Top floor executive suite, 3 days. Confirmed." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the lobby. People were starting to connect the dots. Alexander didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply reclaimed the space with presence alone, the quiet weight of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. From across the lobby, Victoria Kane appeared, her heels striking the marble like a metronome of authority. She strode toward him, eyes sharp. What is he doing back in here? She demanded. Alexander didn't even glance at her. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a single black business card, and placed it gently on the counter. The silver letters caught the light. Alexander Grant, Chief Executive Officer, Grant Capital Holdings' name alone carried weight in the global business world, a man known for billion-dollar turnarounds and ruthless boardroom victories. Victoria froze mid-step. Anyone can print a business card, she said, but her voice had lost its steel. Alexander tapped his phone, and his assistant Rachel's voice came through the speaker, warm and authoritative. Mr. Grant, welcome to your new flagship property. The board is on the line. We're ready for your update. The shift in the room was immediate. Guests who had nodded approvingly at Victoria minutes ago now stepped back. Phones lowered, conversations stopped. The hierarchy was collapsing in real time. Alexander finally looked at her. Let's review your management record, shall we? Ethan, he said without breaking eye contact with Victoria. Pull the last 12 months of employee complaints filter by senior executive actions. Ethan hesitated, then typed. A list appeared on the screen, 22 documented complaints. Nearly all were tied to Victoria Kane. And the settlements? Alexander prompted. 6 payouts appeared, discreet and sealed. Dates, amounts, all under her authorization. This isn't an accident, Alexander said quietly enough to make the silence heavier. This is a pattern, and patterns tell the truth. A voice rose from the far side of the lobby, a woman in a navy skirt suit. She humiliated me during a client presentation. For no reason except she didn't like the way I spoke. Then, another voice and another. A man from security, a woman from accounting. One by one, people began stepping forward, not loud, not chaotic, just steady. The silence Victoria had relied on for years was breaking. Alexander let it build before speaking again. I started my career cleaning floors, he said, his tone measured. I know what it's like to be invisible. I bought this company to change that, and the change starts now. From the speakerphone, Rachel's voice was crisp. Termination file for Victoria Kane, immediate execution. Legal has signed off. Ethan clicked a red icon on his screen. A soft ping followed. Victoria's name vanished from the system in real time. The empire she had controlled so tightly had just erased her with one keystroke. The moment the ping echoed through the reception desk, the room seemed to exhale all at once. Victoria Kane's profile name, title, access credentials was gone. No applause, no theatrics, just quiet finality. She stood frozen, eyes darting between the screen and Alexander, as if waiting for someone to step in and undo what had just happened. No one did. The very people who had supported her minutes earlier now stepped back, suddenly unwilling to share her shadow. Alexander didn't look at her. He looked at the lobby, employees, guests, security, reception holding their collective gaze like a mirror. This place will be rebuilt, he said steadily, not with fear, but with respect, not by protecting positions, but by protecting people. He turned to Ethan. You hesitated earlier. That matters more than you think. Ethan swallowed hard, unsure if he was being reprimanded or recognized. It wasn't enough today, Alexander continued, but it means you have a choice tomorrow. And that choice will define the kind of leader you become. For the first time that morning, a flicker of hope moved through the room. From outside, the rhythmic pop of camera shutters began filtering in. News vans lined the street. Reporters jostled for position as the revolving doors hissed open. Microphones were already raised. Alexander stepped forward into the crush of light and sound. No podium, no prepared remarks, just presence. I didn't come here to fire anyone, he told the press, his voice carrying over the street noise. I came here to keep the people who deserve to stay. Power means nothing if it's never tested. Phones recorded, tweets fired. The line was instantly trending. A reporter called out, Mr. Grant, why didn't you announce yourself before arriving? Alexander didn't hesitate because I don't need anyone bowing when I walk in. I need them serving with integrity when they think no one's watching. Back inside the lobby, staff members watched the press conference on their phones. Some exchanged glances, others simply listened. One employee, a woman from the HR department, stepped forward. "Thank you," she said softly, "for doing what no one else would." Alexander met her eyes, gave a single respectful nod, and moved on. 1 week later, a bronze plaque was mounted beside the main entrance. In this company, respect comes before a business card. No signatures, no logos, just truth. Ethan now stood behind the reception desk wearing a new name tag, acting operations manager. His posture was straighter, his greeting warmer, his presence sharper. The lesson of that day hadn't just stayed in the headlines, it had rooted itself in the building's culture. On CNN, clips of the confrontation still played under bold captions. The cost of arrogance. Social media comments poured in. "That's leadership. She picked the wrong man on the wrong day." Finally, a CEO who walks the talk. In an interview weeks later, when asked if he planned to repeat his undercover visits, Alexander's answer was simple: "There are still places where people think no one's watching. We'll be visiting them soon." And somewhere, in a glass-walled boardroom in another city, a nervous executive who had seen the footage realized he might be next.